Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Honorable Sabrina Repp, as well as His Excellency Antonio Lopez White. I always try to memorize your name.
Spanish name too long, yes.
But thank you very, very much for hosting and for your time and attention at this time of the day. I believe this is my fourth or fifth event with Your Excellency. But I'm always honored to be in Europe and to contribute with the little that we have to make this continent a blessed, safe, secure, harmonious place for all. IMPAC, thank you very much. President Patricia, my good friend Nigel, thank you once again for the invite. And your speech about anti-Semitism reminded me to wish our brothers and sisters, or cousins, shall I say, from the Jewish faith, a blessed, good, and sweet New Year, Shana Tova, to you all. Honorable members of the European Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Two genders, huh? I come before you today not to merely warn, but to sound an alarm. What you are witnessing across your continent is not the benign growth of civic activity. It is a patient, strategic, and increasingly dangerous campaign by a transnational Islamist network to infiltrate and subvert the institutions that hold the European democracy together. This campaign has a name, the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization designated as a terrorist entity by the majority of Muslim states. For 100 years, the Muslim Brotherhood has perfected a twofold playbook: conceal its political aims behind the language of education, charity, and civil society, then use those legal footholds to build influence within parties, unions, media, and policymaking circles. This is not accidental, and it is not by luck. It is deliberate, disciplined, and designed to exploit the very freedoms that make Europe strong. The first vector of penetration is the NGO and charity sector. Across Europe, we have seen associations and community organizations, so-called community organizations, that present as humanitarian or integration partners, but which act as conduits for ideological indoctrination, recruitment, and foreign funding. These are not isolated incidents at all. They form a pattern that is 100 years old. Organizations with front-facing social services that simultaneously push an exclusionary political narrative and cultivate activists for longer-term political projects. The result is the hollowing out of genuine civic life and the creation of parallel networks that answer to an ideological agenda rather than to European democratic norms. Second, the Brotherhood's political penetration is systematic and sophisticated. It cultivates political allies, leverages voter blocs, and lobbies institutions while presenting itself as the voice of Muslims. Again, the Muslim Brotherhood presents itself as the voice of Muslims. And their name is very problematic and racist. To call yourself the Muslim Brotherhood, these two terms are the most sacred in Islam. One, Muslim, hijacks the religion and the name of the religion, and brotherhood, you have hijacked the collective identity of Muslims, regardless of your denomination, school of thought, ethnicity, gender, or background. And Christians and Jews and Muslims, we look at each other as brothers in faith. To hijack that name is not just racist, it is dangerous. And that is why you will notice that I will just refer to them as the Brotherhood, not the Muslim Brotherhood, because they are brothers in terrorism. In reality, the Muslim Brotherhood seeks to replace representative Muslim leadership with proxies who advance a political Islam agenda. When these proxies enter advisory roles, advisory councils, and I remind you all that the Muslim Brotherhood was given a platform in the White House during the era of Barack Hussein Obama and President Biden. They were advisors under the organization by the name of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, that is designated as a terrorist entity by the UAE. For them to become advisors to the United States president is the ultimate victory for the Muslim Brotherhood. When these proxies enter advisory roles, as I said, advisory councils, or become regular interlocutors for governments and EU bodies, they tilt policy debates toward positions that erode secular governance, freedom of expression, and equal citizenship. This is influence, not integration. It is political warfare under the cover of democracy. Third, the Brotherhood leverages labor governments and unions to legitimize itself by embedding operatives within grassroots campaigns on workplace rights, education, again. If you take a look at universities today, the leading professors that are being funded by governments that rely on the Muslim Brotherhood as its front militia, without mentioning any names. It is very important that we take note that not every Muslim academic is genuinely acting for the sake of Islamic academia and for the sake of the humanities within universities. The books and the studies they publish and they push forward, if they smell Muslim Brotherhood, then they are Muslim Brotherhood. By embedding operatives within grassroots campaigns on workplace rights, education, or anti-racism causes, it gains moral credibility and shields its ideology under the cloak of social justice. Can you imagine that? Hamas's mother organization talking about diversity and social justice. Once inside your organizations, dear members of parliament, these actors reframe public debates, mobilize sympathizers, and pressure institutions to accept leaders and narratives that are hostile to pluralism. What do I mean? The regime in Iran has a dictator sitting on top, Ali Khamenei. Can you believe that Ali Khamenei was talking to the students protesting in American and Canadian universities? Direct line of communication via social media. Ali Khamenei can be speaking to your students and your children too, directly. There needs to be measures, and I'm not speaking about sanctions. I'm not a politician, but there needs to be security measures towards terrorist dictators who is the head of the IRGC that you mentioned, Your Excellency, to be communicating with European citizens directly through a tweet or a post on X, as they call it today. So they pressure institutions to accept these leaders and narratives that are hostile to pluralism. This is an exploitation of social solidarity to mask an authoritarian blueprint. Fourth, control of narrative is central to the Brotherhood's success. Satellite channels, social platforms, and sympathetic media outlets amplify grievances, narratives, and stoke identity politics and sanitize extremist positions under more palatable language. The goal is to normalize political Islam and delegitimize those who resist it. When media becomes a weapon, it shapes policy by bending public opinion, not by transparent debate. We must also be blunt about the security dimension. The Muslim Brotherhood, the Brotherhood, is not a monolith. It has branches. I want you to pay careful attention to this. They have branches, sister organizations, affiliates, and offshoots. You designate one, you ban one, like a mushroom, they rise with another logo, another name. And that's why we need to thank the UAE for highlighting the terrorist entities, 8 that were designated in the United Kingdom, just next door. It's a real issue when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood escaping terrorist designation and sanctions. Some offshoots have resorted to violence. Many governments around the world treat aspects of this network as a security threat. Several states have banned, restricted, or labeled branches as illegal or extremist, and lawmakers in multiple democracies have formally debated designation and listing. That is very cute, that you would like to have a debate whether or not to designate a terrorist entity. What are you waiting for? You see, democracy is beautiful. However, when a terrorist is in broad daylight using democracy to weaken democracy, then the dignity and the honor that one has for their own country and their children needs to step in. And that is when you already have the laws in place, by the way. It's a matter of enacting on these laws and applying them on the extremists when required. These are not trivial matters, where intelligence and prosecution have exposed links between actors in civic organizations and violent actors or illicit financing. The evidence has compelled national action. You ignore that reality at your own peril. Let us be clear. This is not an argument against Muslims or against civic associations that do vital work. It is an argument against an organized political project that weaponizes religion to advance an illiberal agenda. Europe must protect its pluralism while cutting off space for organizations that operate hypocritically to undermine the very freedoms that allow them to grow. What does this mean in practice? I propose a decisive European response with three clear pillars. Firstly, require full transparency for organizations that receive public funds or represent communities to EU institutions. Condition European and national funding on audited, traceable finances and prohibitions on foreign political funding that mask ideological agendas. Commission a Europe-wide inquiry to map brotherhood networks. Very, very necessary. As I speak now, you're all imagining, what could this look like? I can tell you what it looks like. Very sophisticated, very complex. You're talking about a community that was here first, before the good people arrived. You're talking about the most lavish mosques and the biggest minarets and Islamist, extremist, pro-terrorists who enter this parliament in LV and Gucci and Prada and suits and ties. They no longer look like me, right? That was a joke, by the way. You were supposed to laugh. Very important that we can identify them. Now, where evidence of illicit activity, support for violence, or subversive political aims exists, member states must act swiftly and in coordination. 3, support and resource representative independent Muslim organizations that unequivocally reject political Islamism, promote civic education that strengthens integration and civic loyalty rather than identity segregation. On the 16th of this month, I had the absolute pleasure of participating on a panel held in an event organized by Trends Research and Advisory on political Islam. That was the 5th annual event. And I invite you all to join these annual events in Abu Dhabi. Furthermore, Trends Research and Advisory has the only encyclopedia that is comprehensive and academic on the Muslim Brotherhood. And I believe now it's reaching 9 volumes, if I'm right. 9 volumes in multiple languages, rich in resources, a must for every academic library. And if the European Parliament can host that encyclopedia, I'm sure that Trends can arrange that for you. It covers every threat within the Muslim Brotherhood, including education. Honorable members, complacency is no longer an option. The Brotherhood's method is patience and concealment. Patience and concealment. You have to run for elections, honorable members of Parliament. The Muslim Brotherhood don't have to think about 4-year terms, 8-year terms. They think in 50-year terms, if not 100-year terms. The seed that was planted 100 years ago is now destroying Europe and has already destroyed many democratic societies. Its goal is influence and transformation. If you allow unchecked penetration of your NGOs, unions, education, media, and political institutions, you will awake to a Europe where your own laws and liberties are reshaped from within. That is not a prophecy, it is a preventable trajectory. I ask this parliament to treat this issue not as a partisan slogan, but as a cross-party institutional security priority. Commission the mapping, tighten transparency rules, and uphold the principle that access to your institutions must be matched by loyalty to democratic values. Let us be unequivocal. Europe will not be hollowed out from within. You will defend the equal rights of all citizens to live free from the imposition of an authoritarian religious project and against the dark and dangerous agendas of the Muslim Brotherhood and the regime in Iran. And we stand with you in that. Thank you for your attention.